I've never seen such a comfortable wilderness survival experience. They stewed wild raccoon meat, made incredibly sweet candied acorns, and deliciously roasted fish, with boiled agave on the side. The highlight was eating wild turkey meat. Honestly, it seemed less like they were surviving in the wild and more like they were out on a gourmet camping trip. This is a survival show featuring a duo. Josh, an experienced hunter whose weapon of choice is a bow and arrow, and Matt, a renowned Michelin-starred chef who excels at cooking with wild ingredients. Together, the hunter and chef ventured into the harsh wilderness of Mexico's Copper Canyon. Over just 7 days, without bringing any food or water, they aimed to prove they could thrive there. The terrain was treacherous, making survival challenging. Josh and Matt only carried basic survival tools, no food, water, or even camping gear. This was truly an unknown challenge. Along the way, they saw various wildlife, including deer, raccoons, and numerous birds. The river at the mountain's base offered a great fishing spot, with their culinary fate resting on the hunter's skills. Upon arriving and contemplating a 7-day stay in this remote place, Chef Matt started to sweat, while Josh was confident, having spotted 2 turkeys on the way, promising roasted turkey for dinner. Thus, their adventurous journey began joyfully. Finding a water source was crucial. Without a map or compass, they relied solely on Josh's survival skills. With the temperature at 26 degrees Celsius, 79 degrees Fahrenheit, dehydration and heat stroke were real risks. By afternoon, they still hadn't found water and were exhausted. Stumbling to a cliff edge, they admired the stunning view and spotted water at the mountain's base, about a kilometer away through dense forest and steep cliffs. As the sun was setting, it seemed impossible to descend that evening. However, Chef discovered a puddle with small bugs swimming in it. Not too dirty and likely safe to boil. At least their water needs were secured for the night. Before dark, they found a campsite, sheltered by rocks to block the wind, built a fire, and settled in for the night. Seeing that it was still early, the two decided to find some food to fill their stomachs. They discovered deer tracks on the ground and a squirrel hopping on the rocks. Unfortunately, the hunter had never hunted squirrels and lacked experience. Matt had no hunting experience, but he was an expert at foraging. The agave they found was rich in carbohydrates, and its core was edible. It needed to be larger to suffice for both of them, and the one they found was just the right size. The white part was edible, but it had to be cooked to break down the chemicals inside. Otherwise, it could cause poisoning. Josh couldn't wait and took a bite, but it was bitter. Soon after, the hunter started feeling unwell, possibly poisoned. It seemed they were in for a sleepless night. Josh, an experienced hunter, and Matt, a Michelin-starred chef, teamed up for a wilderness survival challenge, which seemed incredible. They ventured into a harsh, primitive environment, each displaying their skills to prove they could comfortably survive in the wild. On the first day, the chef made a small mistake by not cooking the agave properly. It tasted bitter and astringent, and soon after eating, the hunter vomited, showing signs of mild poisoning. The temperature dropped sharply at night. Despite having a fire, the chef's face was frozen stiff and they endured a difficult night. Josh hadn't recovered yet, feeling unwell, and with the mountain full of cliffs, food sources were scarce. The hunting area was at the base of the mountain, where resources were relatively abundant. But Josh was too dazed to continue. Chef Matt decided to make a pot of pine needle tea, hoping to replenish some nutrients and help the hunter recover. As for the taste, the hunter tried it and found it quite good. To survive better, they needed to reach the valley bottom, but the journey was far, and after a day and night without calories, they were already exhausted. Before setting off, they needed to find some food. After drinking the pine needle tea, Josh felt somewhat better. He took his bow and arrow and aimed at a local squirrel, not sure if he would succeed. Meanwhile, Chef Matt was not idle. Squirrels often appeared in the area, so there were surely plenty of acorns. Matt often used acorns in his dishes. They tasted delicious when roasted and provided a significant amount of calories. The hunter didn't catch any squirrels, so they had to rely on acorns. There was no other choice. Just being able to fill their stomachs was good enough. Raw acorns are inedible. They must be cooked to break down the tannic acid, making them safe to eat. Fortunately, the chef had brought 3 basic seasonings: salt, sugar, and vinegar. Matt decided to make candied acorns. That evening, they enjoyed a little treat and planned to take some for the road the next day. serving two purposes. Josh couldn't wait to try them and really liked the taste. Their long-missed smiles returned to their faces. This time, the chef did not mess up. At night, they used dry grass as makeshift blankets to sleep comfortably. Early in the morning, the chef woke the hunter to use the leftover acorns to make black coffee, which tasted quite good. After a full meal, they packed up and set out. It took half a day, but they finally reached the valley where they had more options. The hunter's fishing line came in handy as he started making a fishing rod, hoping to catch some fish for nourishment. He also caught a scorpion in the rock crevices, a great bait. However, after fishing for a while, he found the rod too soft and ineffective. Knowing there were fish in the river but unable to catch them was frustrating. In this situation, the hunter had to resort to his second plan. Meanwhile, Chef Matt had his own ideas. Since hunting was not his strength, he decided to look around for usable ingredients. It didn't take long for the chef to discover a Mexican chili plant, a rare find for seasoning. After numerous casts, the hunter finally caught a fish. Though not large, it was enough for a few hundred calories. With the first fish caught, the second and third came naturally. Seeing the hunter bring back food, the chef was inspired to prepare a feast that evening. While the chef was processing the ingredients, Josh went back to check the fishing lines and unexpectedly found more. The chef sliced the fish and cooked it over the fire, planning to use the chili, sugar, and vinegar as seasonings. The flavor was bound to be great. What started as a day of worrying about food turned into a meal of grilled fish. As a renowned Michelin chef, cooking a few small fish was child's play. The sugar and vinegar he brought, along with the wild Mexican chili, were used to make a spicy and sour grilled fish, creating a unique flavor. The fish was grilled until just curled and then drizzled with special sauce. A delicious grilled fish feast was successfully prepared. The hunter tasted it and found it truly delicious. This was the best meal they had had so far. Soon they adapted to the environment here and started enjoying life. With a stable food source, they caught plenty of fish daily. The chef creatively prepared various grilled fish dishes, making their days increasingly comfortable. Although their basic needs were now met, the chef was not satisfied and aimed for a more abundant life by finding more meat. Josh, the hunter, had rich experience in setting simple snares. He expertly placed them in areas frequented by animals, significantly increasing their chances of capture. It had been 5 days since they started. Today, it began to rain, and the two lying on the ground felt lazy, conveniently skipping lunch until the clouds cleared. It was time to check the traps. The first trap was not triggered, but as he approached the next one, he saw prey from afar. A raccoon, not small in size. It was the first time the hunter had caught such an animal. The dream of eating meat was about to come true. Back at the camp, the chef was surprised. The hunter processed the raccoon's fur and innards and hung it on a tree, following New Zealand Maori customs to give thanks for its precious life. Chef Matt decided to slow cook the meat over low heat. High-quality ingredients required simple cooking. Just a sprinkle of Mexican chili was enough. While the meat stewed, the chef took a bath in the river, slowly starting to enjoy life. However, when Josh returned, he found thick smoke billowing from the pot. Upon opening the lid, he found the meat charred. Thinking of the food wasted, the hunter was very angry. After the chef returned from his bath and learned of the burnt meat, he fell into deep self-blame. Even as a Michelin chef, he was helpless with burnt food. However, by cutting off the burnt parts, some of the meat was still edible. Seeing Matt downcast, Josh decided to hunt again. Soon, he found a target, crept up, and shot an arrow, hitting a plump turkey. A feast was still inevitable. Learning from the past, the chef changed the cooking method. He dug a pit, heated it with fire, added a layer of stones, placed the food on top, wrapped it in agave, and sealed the pit. After waiting 10 hours, they could enjoy a delicious feast. The next morning, eager, they carefully extracted the turkey meat. Judging by the color, it was cooked perfectly and looked very appetizing. Tasting such delicious food before leaving, Josh and Matt felt their trip was worthwhile. These two are clearly using the guise of wilderness survival to enjoy life. The sight of their meals makes my mouth water. Succulent, whole roasted lamb, tender wild trout with a crispy outside, and wild quail eggs as an afternoon snack. They're truly living the good life. In this episode, the hunter and chef set sail again, this time to the southern Rhodope Mountains of Bulgaria. This ancient forest is arguably the last wilderness in Europe. Their mission is more than just survival. They aim to create world-class dishes using the wild ingredients from the mountains. This region offers the chef an abundance of wild ingredients, making it a forager's paradise with its variety of medicinal herbs and mushrooms. Mischievous wild boars, as well as deer and goats, are so plentiful they are almost a nuisance, akin to a royal hunting ground. Whether they feast lavishly depends entirely on the hunter's skill. Upon safely landing, their real test begins. They only brought essential survival tools. The hunter brought a bow and arrow and a small knife, while Chef Matt brought only a raincoat and a large iron pot. Hunter Josh surveyed the steep cliffs, which presented significant danger and challenge for tracking prey. It seems they faced some difficult challenges. As newcomers, their first tasks are to find a water source and build a shelter. The water source in the valley is some distance away, and the slope is quite steep. Josh and Matt must first find a flat area to set up camp, and then proceed from there. They walked unhurriedly for about 2 miles, but hadn't yet found a suitable spot to camp when dark clouds began to gather, signaling potential heavy rain. Collecting materials for a fire became their priority. After gathering, they continued forward, descending the slope. However, it wasn't long before a light rain began to fall in the valley. They had to speed up to find a creek before the rain intensified, risking hypothermia if they got wet. Fortunately, the hunters' keen sense of smell quickly led them to a stream. As thunder approached, they raced against time to build shelter. Meanwhile, the sound of a wolf howling not far away frightened the chef. They were both exposed to danger, the stressful situation forcing them to speed up. Unfortunately, the drizzle turned into a steady rain. Josh told Matt to take cover under the tarp while he braved the rain to set up camp. Luckily, the rain stopped after 2 hours. The chef decided to brew some beech leaf tea to warm up. Their initial encounter with such conditions caught them off guard. The hunter decided to check the cliffs for any stray goats. But after the rain, the animals had already returned home to avoid the wet weather. It looked like they would have to spend the night hungry. When encountering this plant in the wild, show restraint. It is the morel mushroom, which can sell for 40 pounds per kilogram in the market. This is a rare and high-end ingredient, one of the world's most expensive fungi. It is rich in flavor and delicious. On the other side, the hunter has made a discovery. Across the mountain, there is a herd of antelopes, tempting just to look at. However, hunting an antelope is not easy. Older female antelopes keep watch and alert the herd if hunters approach, making it difficult to catch one. The hunter, Josh, is too far for a bow shot and must move closer stealthily. Only within range can he ensure a successful shot. To avoid alerting the antelopes, he removes his coat and shoes for a lighter approach, planning to sneak up behind them. Just as Josh prepares to shoot, the antelopes spot him and dash down the mountain. A truly rare opportunity missed. Meanwhile, Chef Matt has made a nice discovery. The area is full of sorrel, a prized dish in upscale restaurants, rich in vitamin C and with a hint of lemon taste, making it one of the luxurious ingredients. While the hunter returns empty-handed, the chef finds ample sorrel. While fetching water from the river, Matt spots small fish, a good source of protein, which they need. Trout are relatively easy to catch by tickling their bellies, temporarily immobilizing them. Following the hunter's advice, Matt manages to catch several trout quickly, securing their dinner. With a few trout, morels, and sorrel, these ingredients are enough for Matt to prepare a grand meal. High-end ingredients often require simple cooking, enhanced at the end with sorrel for extra flavor. The taste is indeed excellent. Matt notes that morels would taste even better with other meats. This meal replenishes thousands of calories, but whether they enjoy a real feast depends on the hunter's performance. To enjoy a roast whole lamb, Hunter Josh went to great lengths. He prepared to leave early in the morning and even woke up the chef, assuring him that they'd live like kings if all went well. The chef, however, thought Josh's pride was at play. Yesterday's failed hunt had been a blow to his ego, and today he was determined to regain his honor. Learning from yesterday's mistakes, Josh decided to wait in the grasslands frequented by antelopes, where he found fresh tracks. It was clear they had passed by about 3 to 4 hours earlier. This seemed a good spot, but waiting was agony. He had to be quiet, as animals are far more alert than humans. Hungry, Josh chewed on grass roots, but after a long wait, he only managed to bring on heavy rain, likely wasting his effort today. Unable to tell where animals might appear amid the abundant pasture, his search was blind, and spotting one would be pure luck. With no sign of Josh returning by late afternoon, Chef Matt went out foraging. Perhaps favored by fortune, Matt soon found a nest of bird eggs just outside. Not being greedy, he took only 6 eggs and returned to camp to make a dish of mushrooms and quail eggs, eating his fill to about 80%. Meanwhile, Josh wasn't so lucky. After a hungry day with nothing to show, he watched from a mountaintop, not missing any corner. Just then, a deer entered his sight, a great opportunity. To not startle the prey, Josh had to approach from downwind. Still, the deer, with its keen sense of smell, escaped. Hunting a deer was as hard as reaching the heavens. Chef Matt made another surprising find: ample wild onions and thyme, plus the valuable burdock root. Josh, on the other hand, waited almost the entire day with no success. As evening approached and it was too late to return to camp, he had to find a spot to camp overnight. Making a fire in the wilderness was inevitable. Josh used 2 flat pieces of wood to contain the fire, allowing it to burn all night. Continuous failures were disheartening, but he didn't give up. After 2 days without proper calorie intake, he didn't have much time left. On his way, he spotted antelope tracks again, but unfortunately scared them off. Antelopes have vision 16 times that of humans, and an impressive sense of smell. They can detect human presence from afar. Weakened, Josh just wanted to return to camp and find something to eat. Without Josh around, Chef Matt felt bored and unsure how much longer he could hold on. Along the way, the hunter replenished his water. As he sighed, a nearby antelope locked eyes with him deeply. The hunter quietly moved behind it, timed his shot, and released an arrow that struck the target immediately. Seeing the fallen antelope made Josh somewhat sad, as it was a shame to kill such a beautiful animal, but survival in the wild left no other choice. Having not seen the hunter for a long time, Chef Matt worried Josh might have fallen off a cliff. Unbeknownst to him, Josh was roasting skewers and enjoying delicious grilled lamb heart, thrilled by the transformation from having nothing to feasting. Early next morning, Josh returned to camp with several kilograms of deer meat. Seeing such a large bounty, Chef Matt was ecstatic. They then set up a fire to roast the whole lamb and made a nutritious soup using mushrooms, burdock root, and wild onions to go with the deer meat. This meal compensated for the hardships of the previous days, resembling a feast fit for a king. In the wild, survival often revolves around food worries, yet these two enjoyed a seafood buffet. They savored tender wild river shrimp and juicy clams, tried stone-grilled fish and bamboo-steamed fish, and topped it off with local wild blue fruit. Life was indeed delightful. In this episode, the hunter and chef arrived at the mangrove swamps of Kalimantan Island. They specifically hired a fishing boat to reach their destination. Along the way, Josh looked around, finding the environment worse than expected. With only basic survival tools, the hunter and chef were still confident they could live regally, given the area's rich resources, though it also hid unknown dangers like crocodiles that hadn't eaten human flesh in 30 years and could attack at any time. Due to low water levels ahead, their large boat couldn't continue, and they had to switch to a smaller boat. Likely due to the show's limited budget, the small boat began taking on water not too far into their journey. Fortunately, the leaking was slow. They had to find a riverbank to land on quickly. Once ashore, the chef found it extremely hot and humid, the dense vegetation creating an almost airless environment. Fortunately, they were near a river, but the water definitely couldn't be drunk directly. It had to be boiled to kill any bacteria. With dark clouds gathering, setting up camp became their priority, and the two started working together. The chef was responsible for building the shelter, while the hunter tackled the problem of starting a fire. At first glance, there seemed to be no good tinder available. Josh had to crush dry palm leaves, hoping they would work, but it was clear they were of little use. Soon, the hunter found a dead tree and kicked off a branch. He slowly shredded the branch into fibers. Perhaps due to the moisture in the environment, he still failed to start a fire. With the temperature around 30 degrees Celsius, failing to replenish water could lead to dehydration. The dark clouds overhead grew thicker, and the situation became more urgent. Getting soaked could mean an early end to this episode of the survival show. Fortunately, the chef's shelter was nearly complete. To ensure access to clean water, the hunter urgently needed to solve the fire-starting problem. After searching in the forest, he found some success, despite the wood being rotted. He managed to scrape some usable fibers, and this time, he successfully lit the fire, meaning they could boil water to drink. After a busy half-day, they thought they could finally hydrate themselves. However, when the chef took a sip, he spat it out. The river water was salty and undrinkable. The hunter deduced it was due to the tide bringing in seawater. The high water levels had flooded the river, and now they could only wait for the tide to recede to drink fresh water. It was a challenging first day. With no better options, the chef stayed put to wait for the tide to ebb, then used bamboo to store some fresh water. Meanwhile, Josh set out in a small boat to find food. He had to conserve energy and moved slowly in the shade. Soon he found some snails and used their meat as bait to set up several fishing lines, hoping to catch fish the next day. When the tide receded, they finally drank fresh water and stored some for later use. The only downside was that they would go to bed hungry tonight. Making bamboo-steamed fish was a first for the chef, a dish born out of necessity. Earlier, the chef and hunter had argued. The story goes back a few hours when the hunter went to check the fish lines he had set the previous day. Arriving at the river, he found the boat almost submerged. While trying to tilt the boat to drain the water, the iron pot slipped away unnoticed. By the time he went to look for it, the pot had disappeared. Meanwhile, the chef was gathering wild southern ginger, a fine cooking ingredient that also relieves nausea. Returning to camp, the chef was eager to share his find, but the hunter had to admit he lost the iron pot, which irritated the chef. With 5 or 6 days left in the challenge, losing the pot meant they couldn't cook their food. The hunter apologized and mentioned he had brought back a catfish, but without a pot, cooking was a problem. He suggested using the lid of the pot to cook or making bamboo-steamed fish as an alternative. At this point, there was no other choice. Cooking with bamboo is a method that local natives have used for thousands of years, but it was Michelin-starred Chef Matt's first attempt. Despite being in the wild where unexpected events can occur at any time, they had to learn to adapt. Neither Matt nor Josh expected that bamboo-steamed fish would taste so good, with the fish having a subtle, fresh bamboo scent, making it a delightful dish. However, this meal only provided a few hundred calories, far from enough for their daily needs. They required more meat. Hunter Josh, with his extensive experience in the wild, is an excellent tracker. After spotting mud on palm leaves, he deduced that an animal, likely a wild boar, had passed through. Mud traces on a nearby small tree suggested that a boar had been scratching itself there, indicating it was not very large, probably around 20 kilograms. However, the dense forest made it difficult to use a bow and arrow effectively, so setting up a hunting trap seemed more appropriate. Josh then cut 7 or 8 bamboo sticks to create a triangular trap. After 2 days of eating only half a fish, their physical exhaustion was significant, and Josh was nearly overwhelmed. He had to set up the trap before dark, putting all his effort into it. Meanwhile, Chef Matt was busy making a grill, confident in Josh's ability to catch prey and preparing to cook a delicious meal. Once the hunting trap was built, they carried it to the back mountain, placing it in a spot frequently visited by wild boars, using snails as bait. It is said that prey animals are attracted to black objects, so whether they would enjoy a feast depended on this setup. While they struggled for food in the wilderness, they had already enjoyed a seafood buffet, seemingly turning their survival challenge into a gourmet cooking session outdoors. Later, Hunter Josh discovered wild boar tracks in the back mountain and constructed a sturdy hunting cage. Today was the time to check it. The trap had been triggered, but it was empty. Observing the scene, Josh guessed that a boar had only poked its head in, and the mechanism was not strong enough to support its weight. This failure dealt a severe blow to their confidence, and Josh sighed deeply, out of ideas. However, Chef Matt suggested an alternative. Since they couldn't catch a boar, they should try catching some shrimp in the river. Josh agreed, skilled in making shrimp nets. He crafted a bamboo raft and shaped it into a basket with a triangular entrance and a large hole at the back. In a critical moment, Matt sacrificed his scarf to cover the hole, and they used the leftover fish head from yesterday as bait. To prevent the bait from being washed away, Matt reluctantly contributed a sock. With everything set, all they needed was the right opportunity. Over the past 2 days, They have been busy setting up hunting traps, which exhausted the two of them. Despite being here for 4 days, they've been hungry for 3.5 days. The chef and the hunter each only had half a catfish, and they desperately needed more food or they'd be in real trouble. Fortunately, the shrimp trap brought good news. The river shrimp caught were larger than 2 fingers. The hunter quickly went to make a fire to cook the shrimp to perfection, while the chef searched for premium ingredients. He found galangal, which is more intense and spicier than wild ginger, offering authentic Southeast Asian flavor. Here, as long as you have enough knowledge, you can find any ingredient you need. The chef also discovered something interesting, a green, olive-like wild fruit called breadfruit, which tastes sour like a tart apple. High-quality ingredients often require simple cooking, and this time they used a bamboo tube. First, they placed shrimp heads at the bottom, then added galangal and breadfruit, followed by shrimp tails, more slices of galangal, and finally, more shrimp tails to support the rest. This unique cooking method allowed all the shrimp tails to absorb the flavors of the ingredients. They filled the tube with water, and after cooking for an hour, it was time to enjoy the meal. Opening the bamboo tube, the aroma was overwhelming, and the seafood soup was truly delicious. The chef didn't hesitate to give it a high score of 12 out of 10. Although they were no longer worried about food, they were still far from a royal lifestyle. They say, when luck is on your side, not even fate can stop it. The hunter casually caught another catfish, his spirits lifted by the continuous successes. Josh returned to the camp with a proud stride. The chef was a bit annoyed by this. This time, the hunter wanted the chef to taste his own cooking skills. He spat some liquid into the pot lid, rubbed it evenly, casually threw some salt on it, and then placed the catfish on top. His actions resembled those of a professional chef. Meanwhile, Chef Matt went to the river to check for any trapped shrimp, only to find that the boat was missing. The irresponsible hunter had forgotten to secure the small boat, making their return to civilization a problem. With no immediate solution, he decided to fill his stomach first and then plan further. When informed about the missing boat, the hunter was not worried, confident he had a plan to handle the situation. Afterward, the two came to a nearby body of water and manually gathered many clams. They then pulled up the shrimp cage and were surprised to find not only about 10 large river shrimp, but also a large crab inside. With so many ingredients, they had enough for a lavish meal. Matt's previously prepared grill came in handy. The pair divided the tasks clearly. The hunter began building a raft while the chef got busy preparing the feast. Grilling the high-quality ingredients simply was the most direct method. They sat on the ground, talked about life, and enjoyed a regal existence, hardly believing this was part of a wilderness survival show. They were supposed to be surviving in the wild, but seemed more like they were out for a picnic. Staying in the wilderness for 6 days, they even enjoyed a wild boar feast, with dishes like great braised pork and smoked grilled pork chops, which were drool-worthy. Add a bowl of corn salad and grilled lizards for supper, and their happiness was maxed out. In this episode, the hunter and chef ventured into the cloud forests on the outskirts of Mexico, which are more lush than rainforests and relatively richer in resources. They brought only basic survival tools and aimed to live regally over the next 7 days. It was the chef's first time on a jungle adventure, where he could gather wild fruits and vegetables, being careful to avoid poisonous ones. The depths of these forests were a paradise for hunters, with various birds residing here. Of course, targeting wild boar was essential for a regal life. Finding a water source was their primary task, and the hunter decided to set up camp on flat ground near the water. This gave them a chance to catch animals coming to drink. However, the nearest water source was 8 kilometers away, requiring them to travel through dense undergrowth and occasionally climb steep slopes in temperatures reaching 30 degrees Celsius, which was physically draining and dehydrated them quickly. The inexperienced chef was gasping for breath after a short while, but the hunter, using his expertise, soon found a water source. They didn't waste time and quickly replenished their water from this relatively clean, flowing stream. Setting up camp was now crucial. They worked together. The hunter stayed to build the shelter, while Chef Matt tried his luck at the stream to see if he could catch some wild crabs to satisfy their hunger. Where there is water, there is life. In no time, they caught 5 or 6 crabs. On the way back, the chef made an additional discovery. The tree was a Mexican pepper tree, a rare and valuable spice with a hint of star anise flavor. Paired with a crab soup, the flavor would be even more delightful. Meanwhile, the hunter had already constructed the roof. Seeing the food the chef brought back, he eagerly started a fire to prepare dinner while playfully engaging with the crabs. Unexpectedly, the crabs started to escape. During the chase, the chef accidentally cut the hunter's hand with his knife, causing blood to gush out. The humid environment posed a risk of sepsis if the wound was not properly treated. Chef Matt felt terribly guilty and sought to make amends by preparing a delicious river crab soup. He crushed the crabs to allow every part to infuse the soup, enhancing it with wild spices from the forest. The flavor was excellent, hopefully distracting the hunter from his injury. The delicious crab soup energized them. But it was just the start of the day. Facing the situation that required the chef to go hunting himself, he showed remarkable talent with the slingshot, hitting the target within a few tries. After the hunter's hand was injured, they woke up hungry the next morning. Last night's crab soup was just the tip of the iceberg. The hunter picked up his bow and arrows and followed the animal trails. Despite the wild boar's poor vision and hearing, its keen sense of smell made it a challenging target. Along the way, the hunter spotted some birds and shot an arrow, but missed by several centimeters, which was uncharacteristic of him. The injury and yesterday's exertion significantly affected his accuracy. Though he missed again, he discovered wild coffee beans, which provided a little energy boost. Seeing the hunter return empty-handed, the chef suggested changing strategies. He then asked the hunter to teach him how to use the slingshot. Matt quickly mastered it and soon went out to practice. With no other options and having been hungry for a day and a half, they couldn't just sit around. Upon entering the forest, the chef spotted a small bird, confidently pulled the slingshot, and hit the target, surprising himself with his own hunting talent. However, after searching the area, he couldn't find the bird. The dense bushes indeed made it difficult to locate, which was truly a pity. Josh found traces of wild boars along the way, but hunting them isn't easy. He thought setting traps along their path was the smartest approach, so he set up simple snare traps. Meanwhile, Chef Matt made a new discovery: Central American palms, also known as corn that grows on palm trees, which are rich in starch and could make a decent lunch. Along the way, Matt also found a waterfall and expected to find plenty of wild vegetables nearby. He identified a plant called capote, which could serve as a vegetable, though its stem must be cut away and discarded. Continuing on, he stumbled upon wild grapes, rich in vitamin C and pleasantly sweet and sour. After setting the traps, Josh also looked for other game and spotted an unknown bird in the trees, but unfortunately, he failed to catch it. He felt weak and drained. Fortunately, Chef Matt brought back some vegetables and was carefully processing the leaves, aware of the potential natural chemicals in wild plants, which should not be eaten without caution. Matt made a vegetable soup with the palm corn. They had just started eating it and thought it tasted fine, but soon the chef felt something was off, as his mouth felt like it was on fire, likely due to toxins in the leaves not being properly cleaned. Their only meal was thus ruined, which was quite bad. It had been 3 days since they started, and they had been hungry for 2 days. Waking up feeling low on energy, Matt used the leftover wild grapes to make a pot of sour soup that looked like wine and tasted excellent. They reflected on the past few days without any meat and realized this couldn't continue. The snares had been set for a day without any catches, which left Josh feeling a deep sense of defeat. Then, as if by a stroke of luck, a lizard appeared right in their path. Josh killed it with a brick, providing them finally an opportunity to eat meat. Chef Matt was thrilled and decided to make roasted lizard with crab sauce, expecting it to taste very nice. This meal significantly replenished their calories, providing much more protein than chicken eggs. However, they were uncertain when their next meal would be. Hunter Josh's snare traps still yielded nothing, despite seeing plenty of animal tracks days ago. Perplexed and unable to catch any, it seemed futile to pursue wild boar meat this way. After consulting with Chef Matt, they decided to change tactics. On their way, they found fresh animal droppings, likely from minutes ago, showing clear signs of wild boars. Josh decided to set up a trap here and soon cut down many bamboos to start building a sturdy rectangular cage. The trap would trigger once an animal entered, with their last food items, 2 large crabs and some wild grapes, as bait. They tested the cage, but it drained much of their energy. The wild boar was their last hope as they were extremely hungry, their stomachs growling and limbs trembling from exhaustion. By evening, when Chef Matt checked the trap, not even a fly was inside. It was another hungry night, and survival itself was a struggle after 6 days. The next day, they checked the pig trap again, their last resort. This time, it did not disappoint. A wild boar was indeed caught, looking quite fierce with 3 centimeters long tusks. Humanely, Josh quickly ended its life with a knife to the heart. Chef Matt, unaccustomed to such scenes, felt uneasy. To prepare a lavish meal, he personally sought ingredients, including a unique red seed from a lipstick tree, perfect for marinating the meat. He planned to slow cook the tougher cuts, tenderizing the meat gradually. Adding wild grapes would enhance the pork's juiciness. The ribs were smoked, and the loin was slow roasted on bamboo. After days of idleness, the sudden flurry of activity overwhelmed Matt. Salivating over the deliciously grilled pork, a fine presentation was a must, showcasing Chef Matt's expertise. After enduring 6 tough days, the chef and the hunter finally savored a feast fit for kings. However, surviving in the wild is challenging and not for the faint-hearted. In the frigid wilderness of the polar regions, 2 men not only enjoyed a special grilled fish feast, but also had the chance to taste the local specialty of tree bark porridge and snack on yams. Their life was not wealthy, but it was at least comfortable. This time, the hunter and the chef arrived in the polar wilderness of northern Finland, located on the edge of the Arctic Circle. Over the next 7 days, they could only rely on nature's resources to create unusual and delicious dishes, with the hunter also aiming to prove that he could survive well in any corner of the world. The 2 brought only basic survival tools. In such extreme cold, they faced not just the cold, but also the challenge of scarce food. Snow could fall at any time. Finding a suitable place to set up camp was a priority, and the lake ahead seemed a good choice. However, walking on snow was not easy, and reaching the lake required considerable effort. Their progress was slow and energy-consuming. As snowflakes began to fall, they realized continuing this way was not viable. They would exhaust themselves before reaching their destination. Hunter Josh decided to make snowshoes using several branches tied together. Although still slow, at least they did not sink into the snow. Soon, Josh spotted animal droppings, indicating the presence of mammals like beavers and muskrats, but catching them depended on the hunter's skills. As they walked on, an open area suggested that beneath the snow might be a frozen lake. The chef used an iron shovel to dig a hole, and water began to seep out, but it was murky and smelled of marshland, leading Josh to conclude it was not lake water. This was disappointing. After all the effort, they found nothing and had to continue their journey. Whether by divine favor or luck, they soon found a clear water source. With the sun setting, they quickly set up camp. Josh chose a tree and decided to build a tree hole campsite there. With nighttime temperatures dropping to at least minus 30 degrees Celsius, arranging insulation was essential. The hunter chopped down spruce branches and laid a layer as insulation, which significantly increased warmth. He also began to set up camp. The moss he found served as excellent tinder, and he quickly prepared a week's worth of tinder without hesitation. This time, he opted for traditional flint for starting fires. Once the fire was lit, the temperature instantly rose by 8 degrees. Surviving in icy conditions means water is abundant. Upon arriving, they temporarily secured a stable shelter. The next step was securing food. In previous episodes, the hunter and chef enjoyed roasted lamb and a lavish wild boar feast, as well as a seafood buffet. However, in this extremely cold region, they were reduced to eating bark porridge. The bark of the red pine, used during famines to stave off hunger, was their only option, which mirrored their current dire situation. The bark is high in fiber and minerals, and the chef planned to use it as a substitute for cereal, providing several hundred calories per handful. Determined to fish, the experienced hunter found suitable bait despite the harsh cold. Fresh sawdust on trees indicated plenty of maggots hidden inside. Ignoring other concerns, he decided to first enjoy the fresh bait. Then, using a long stick, he crafted an ice chisel and opened a small hole in an open area. However, today was not conducive to fishing. After sitting for 2 to 3 hours without seeing a single fish, feeling both hungry and cold, he decided to leave the fishing line in place for automatic fishing, but filled the hole with branches to prevent it from refreezing. Returning to camp, the hunter found the chef making bark porridge. Despite showing some disdain, the chef remarked that having any food was fortunate under the circumstances, and that bark porridge was a traditional local delicacy. However, the taste was quite overpowering. The hunter spat out his first taste, and the chef also declared he never wanted to eat bark again. After 2 days and missing 7 or 8 meals, they faced severe challenges. The fishing line set by the hunter yesterday yielded no catch, and the chef's attempt to find some mountain berries also failed. 4 days into the journey, the two could only rely on tree bark to stave off hunger. The hunter's stomach was cramping from hunger, and for breakfast, they could only boil some pine needle tea to fill their stomachs. Later, he checked the fishing line again, but still had no luck. The bait was eaten, and the small fish had escaped. Their luck wasn't very good, but it did indicate that there were fish in the lake. The hunter decided to wait a bit longer, and after persevering through half the day, he finally caught a fish as small as a pinky finger. However small, it was still a fish, and a good start. Soon, a second fish was caught, slightly larger than the first. As they say, once luck turns, even fate can't stop it. Before long, they had caught several fish. While small, they were a decent source of protein, and tonight they wouldn't have to eat bark. The smaller fish were used as bait by the hunter, hoping to catch bigger fish the next day. The cooking was left to Chef Matt, who used juniper leaves to enhance the flavor of the small fish, perhaps improving the taste. The cooking time needed was short, just 5 minutes to keep the fish tender. This meal marked the halfway point of their journey, and was the first decent meal they had since starting. After this meal, it was uncertain when their next meal would be, or what it would entail. The hunter discovered a beaver lodge and thought if he could catch one, it might sustain them until the end of the competition. He decided to disrupt the beaver dam to lower the water level around the lodge, forcing the beaver to come out and repair the damage, giving him a chance to catch it. The plan was perfect, but its effectiveness remained to be seen. After setting his trap, the hunter stayed to wait for the beaver. Meanwhile, Chef Matt had found abundant mountain berries and lingonberries, great for making jam or smoking meat. He also discovered deer moss nearby, a valuable source of carbohydrates. With a sudden abundance of food, the chef was energized, but the hunter wasn't as fortunate. After waiting all day, with the sun about to set, there was still no sign of the beaver. His luck seemed to be running low. The chef's experience was different. He had just picked some wild berries and found a patch of mountain yams along the way. These yams are rich in protein, but he was unsure about their taste. After thinking for just 2 seconds, he decided to try this unique afternoon snack. Surprisingly, it tasted great, much like lemon juice. Once he started, he couldn't stop. Meanwhile, the hunter was still waiting for a beaver to appear, with no success so far. Perhaps the beaver could smell him and was too scared to come out. When the chef returned to camp, he found that the hunter hadn't come back yet, and the fire had gone out. Having no experience with starting fires, he reluctantly gave it a try, and to his surprise, found it easier than expected, which delighted him. The chef then prepared a dish of roasted deer spleen with mountain yams and some wild berries, which was surely 100 times better than bark. The taste was exceptionally good, but unfortunately, the hunter missed out on this feast. He had waited 6 hours, and the beaver still hadn't shown up. Looking like he didn't have the energy to return to camp, he temporarily built a shelter. Having failed to lure out the beaver, the hunter had no choice but to rush back to camp. Back at camp, the chef's day had been rather fruitful, and he even saved some mountain berries and roasted deer spleen for the hunter. The hunter hoped they could go together next time to hunt the beaver, increasing their chances of success. To save energy, they took a shortcut, but were stopped by a stream. They intended to chop down a tree to make a bridge, but during the process, the chef accidentally fell into the river, which was problematic. In the freezing water, his body temperature dropped 25 times faster than usual. If they didn't dry his body quickly, he would risk hypothermia. In this urgent situation, they had to head back. Back at camp, he immediately took off his wet clothes to dry them and drank some hot water to raise his body temperature, narrowly saving his life. The dream of eating beaver meat was shattered, so the hunter and chef pinned their hopes on fishing. Unexpectedly, they caught a big fish this time. The chef decided to cook it using a local method, making plank-grilled fish with aromatic birchwood, tender juniper juice, and lingonberries, enhancing the flavor. This cooking method locked in the nutrients of the fish and didn't take long, just 10 minutes. Finally, it was served with a wild berry sauce, irresistibly delicious. True to his Michelin chef status, though they didn't live like kings, they managed a decent meal in the end. Survival in the wild, especially in such frigid conditions, is indeed challenging. Would you have the courage to take on such a challenge? Survival in the wilderness like never before. While others worry about food in the wild, they not only feasted on large prawns, but also enjoyed tender grouper and natural coconut milk. Even Ed might envy them. This episode takes place on Pulau Tiga, Malaysia. Over the next 7 days, they must survive there and prepare extraordinary dishes using natural ingredients. The island is rich in resources like palm plants and wild fruits, and the sea offers barracuda and large prawns. They brought only diving gear and basic survival tools. The first task in wilderness survival is to find fresh water, which means exploring inland. The dense jungle is full of small spikes, causing the chef some trouble. Soon, the hunter discovered a lagoon that looked dirty and harbored crocodiles, making water collection risky. The hunter tasted the water and found it too salty to drink, likely contaminated by seawater. Their start was not smooth, and they had to keep searching. If they couldn't find a water source, their 7-day adventure might end early. They followed the riverbed but found no water source as the temperature rose, and the chef started feeling headaches and weakness, possibly signs of dehydration. Cutting a vine could provide some emergency water. However, for long-term survival, they needed sustainable drinking water. Not far along, the chef found a puddle of water. Dirty, but boilable for drinking. Later, they built a simple swing on the beach and hydrated. The hunter collected many hermit crabs from the beach, excellent bait for fishing. He decided to fish for bigger catches, but initially caught only seaweed. As the sun set, he left the fishing line out for night fishing, hoping for a better catch the next day. They spent the night hungry. Early in the morning, the hunter, Josh, went diving, a sport he loves, while the chef found garbage on the beach that might be useful. He then entered the jungle to look for ingredients, being an expert in this area. However, he found nothing after walking all morning. The hunter also returned empty-handed after several hours of diving with poor visibility. They need to consume 1,000 calories daily to avoid muscle loss. After a day and a half of hunger, what strategies will the chef and hunter employ next? The chef stared at the coconut, lost in thought. There were no coconut trees on the island. The only explanation was that it had drifted from another island. Without hesitation, the chef decided to collect a few coconuts to take back. Each coconut could provide at least 1,500 calories, a valuable food source. Excited, the chef returned to camp, happy to have secured a meal. However, the hunter was distressed because his confident dive had yielded nothing, leaving their situation grim. They had thought the island was a paradise, but ended up hungry all day. Coconuts could only help temporarily, and might cause diarrhea if eaten in excess. They needed to find other food sources. There were plenty of hermit crabs on the beach. The chef had an idea, cooking the crabs with the coconuts. But hermit crabs are small and might not have much meat. Soon, they collected half a basket. The chef prepared to cook the crabs, while the hunter made coconut milk, calling it forest milk, a popular ingredient in Southeast Asia. The chef decided to cook the crabs with the coconut milk. It seemed like a feast was in store until the hunter spit out his first bite. Hermit crabs are scavengers that eat rotten fish and even feces. Their intestines must be cleaned thoroughly. It seemed they were in for another hungry night. For 3 days, they had relied on coconuts. The hunter then considered another option. He looked towards another island, thinking it might be worth trying their luck there. He suspected the dark blue waters around it had reefs frequented by fish and possibly lobsters. However, reaching that island required building a raft. Trusting the hunter's judgment, they split up to gather materials for the raft. They collected many bamboos and plastic bottles, worked for 4 hours, and made a basic structure, also adding a fishing net platform for shark protection. They stabilized the raft with 2 diagonal bamboos, but the sea was rough, so they waited until the next morning. After eating some coconut meat, they set off. The island seemed close, but navigating the raft was hard work. It took nearly a day, but they finally reached the island, only to be dismayed. There, the chef nearly broke down. The island was barren, with no fresh water or other resources, unsuitable for setting up camp. The hunter quickly took action, crafting a spear from a straight bamboo pole. They were on a sandbank with minimal silt, and the waters were clear, promising a greater variety of fish. The hunter aimed for the grouper, a common and seemingly easier catch. Josh seized the moment, and with a swift thrust of the spear, he caught a grouper. Meanwhile, the chef was busy along the shoreline searching for edible ingredients. He soon discovered green caviar, also known as sea grapes, which are rich in iron and nutritious. They alone could sustain them, bursting in the mouth much like caviar, a delicacy many pay dearly to taste. With a fish already in hand, Josh planned to check under the rocks for clams. As an experienced diver, he could hold his breath underwater for 3 minutes. Though he didn't find any clams, he unexpectedly came across a large lobster, marking a successful haul. Back on shore, the chef's eyes widened in excitement. This trip was not in vain. Now it was up to the Michelin-level chef. High-end ingredients often require simple cooking. He cooked the lobster with its eggs, shell side down, to keep the meat tender. It only needed 5 to 10 minutes. When he lifted the pot lid, the dish was a feast for the senses, exceptionally tasty. After 4 days, the duo finally enjoyed a substantial meal. However, lacking fresh water, the chef and the hunter had to return to their original camp after a night's rest. On the way, Josh secured the raft with rope and dove again to search the sea. The chef, not seeing Josh for a while, started fishing from the raft, but soon noticed the rope had come loose from the rock, and the raft began to drift. Unable to see the hunter, the chef grew anxious but eventually spotted a figure not far away. With no gains this time, they had to return to camp. But returning to a diet of coconuts and hermit crabs after a full meal was nauseating. It seemed they had to think of another plan. While collecting water, the chef discovered a palm tree. The heart of the palm can be eaten directly and tastes like nuts. The hunter, Josh, figured out that it was a full moon tonight, which means fish would jump into tide pools as the tide rose. They might get lucky and catch some big fish. Taking advantage of the night, they searched along the beach. The chef found a redfish but had to be careful as its tail was spiny. To prepare a delicious meal, the chef gathered some curry leaves to combine with coconut milk and cream, enhancing the flavor of the fish soup. Before leaving, they enjoyed a substantial and tasty meal, making their trip worthwhile.